name's Nam McGrail. I'm the Senior Vice President of Partnership Activation for the LA Kings. I oversee the activation of all of our sponsorship deals. And I'm a part of Global Partnerships, which is a division within AEG, our parent company. I went to UCLA, Henry. And I have 2 championship rings, which each one of my kids has claimed as their own. So I need to win one more time so that I can keep one for myself.
I like that. Welcome.
Hello guys, my name is Armando Yin. I'm a live television producer and director. I contract for Fox Deportes and Fox Sports in Spanish and TVG, which is the horse racing network. I started out from the bottom. I started out as a logger, then became an editor, and then eventually now work in the control room. And as I interact with a lot of brand sponsors, is my role really to execute them. So let's say we have the State Farm player to watch, or we have the Subway player of the game. It's our responsibility to not only execute that billboard, but also choose the player and then decide how much content time we're going to give to that player. And also, make sure that the talent do read the live sponsorships. Sometimes we have Medicare that's sponsoring a certain segment, and the talent has to read, this segment is sponsored by Medicare, call 1-800-773 for more information. And so my typical weekends are extremely busy because sports primarily are played on the weekends. I cover the German Bundesliga, and so I'll typically be in the control room around 4 a.m. to go live at 6. And then after that's done, I run over to TVG and cover the racetracks across the globe. I focus on Los Al, which is the racetrack down here in Los Alamitos. So that's a little bit about my exposure to sports and brands.
Thank you.
I'm I'm Henry Watson, Vice President of Distribution and Partnership Marketing at Pac-12 Networks. Relatively new to sports, kind of. I've been at Pac-12 for 5 years. Been in the entertainment industry for 25 plus years. Started out at MTV, went from there to DirecTV International, running DirecTV Japan, and then various other places along the journey. Been at Pac-12 for 5 years, been enjoying it, and some of my main focus coming up as we're talking today is international distribution and partner marketing, and we're looking at different platforms called AVOD platforms, advertiser-supported VOD, or FAST platforms are called, which are on platforms like Xumo, Pluto, Philo, Samsung TV Plus, platforms like that. So that's some of our priority moving forward.
Awesome.
Hi guys, I'm Autumn Nazarian. I'm a Senior Vice President at Mindshare in a department called Content Plus, and I specialize in sponsorships and partnerships. Mindshare is a media company, so our team is an expert group within a larger construct that buys TV and digital and social and out of home and all the traditional medias. But we work as a very specialized group doing both content as well as helping brands decide how to intelligently spend their money, identify and negotiate and activate great sports sponsorships within their media budgets most of the time. And I've been at this job for way too long, like 15 years, but we've been like 6 companies, and it's been a wild ride. But I've worked with every major league, NBA, MLB, NFL, a little NHL, worked with grassroots soccer, and just really have every year watching how the industry is evolving and how technology is changing sports sponsorships has been super inspiring and keeps me really interested in my job because year to year it changes tremendously. And so working in a media agency, a slight difference to my amazing colleagues here is that there is quite an eye on the working dollar versus the sponsorship dollar. And so one of the things that we're tasked with is making sure that if you're spending $3 million on a league deal, that there are tangible assets within that deal that ladder back to a real value. And so we're really forced to show that sponsorships not only do what they're supposed to do, which is give you a halo association with an amazing sports team and fan base, but that you're also providing real value and that horrible word ROI that can be calculated in many, many ways, and prove to clients that the money is well spent.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's a really good segue for my first question, which is going to be to give the audience an example of an activation, where you've integrated a brand or a product or even a celebrity into a project that you've worked on. And Autumn, maybe that is a good question for you to start with, since you just mentioned it. I think it's interesting from my perspective to when you talked about sponsorship versus like a direct response type of perspective. Those buyers are very different, where they're trying to calculate an ROI versus associate their brand with a partner that can bring some overarching meaning that isn't necessarily ROI calculated.
Yep, absolutely. So when we talk about sponsorship, we talk about how if you were investing your money, you would diversify your portfolio, because different things that you invest in do different things. And so one example that I can share that's LA-based, LA-centric, so for those of you from LA in the room, you'll maybe have even encountered some of these elements. How many people in the room are Dodger fans? Yay! So one of my clients that's Southern California based is AMPM Convenience Stores, and they're a regional brand. They don't exist east of the Rockies, and as you can imagine, their biggest competitor starts with a number and has a lot of money and is a national brand and is known for doing a lot of really cool things. But the Southern California market is so important to my client, and they really wanted to dig in and see, who are the people shopping at their store, and then where does that overlap with, activities in LA. And so we looked at everything. It wasn't just sports. And at the end of the day, we found a wonderful affinity with Dodger Nation. No surprise there. And so what we ended up doing was, sitting down with our clients and them saying to us, okay, this is great. We love the Dodgers. But we have to make money from this deal. It can't just be a branding campaign, because people already know about us. So what can we do that would be different and say something about how cool our brand is? And so really what we did is we sat down with the team and we had some really deep conversations about AMPM and the brand. If you guys are familiar with it, their tagline is "Too much good stuff." Have you guys heard that tagline? And so one insight that kind of popped for us is that if you think about it, when you go to the stadium, there are different snacks and candies and food items at a stadium than in other places that you'd expect. So for example, if you went to the theater, like the movie theater, and there was no chocolate, you would be appalled. But you go into a sports stadium, and I dare you to find a Snickers bar. It's like a scavenger hunt. And so what we ended up doing was, through top secret negotiations, which I can't share, creating an AMPM store in Dodger Stadium that has over 75 items. So by far, that's like triple what any other concession stand has. And they have things like candy and ice cream, chocolate bars, hot coffee, which didn't exist in the stadium before that. And so it really was a beautiful partnership to bring to life their brand promise, which is we'll have tons of great stuff that you want to eat and snack on. And then what we did to double down in the second year is we negotiated the right for them to sell hot Dodger dogs at AMPM convenience stores during the season. Wow. And so all of a sudden, what started out as a lovely translation of the brand promise became an actual product in the store that people would buy, because if you're a Dodger fan and you're not headed to Dodger Stadium and you want a Dodger dog for a lot less money, you can go to AMPM and get hot Dodger dogs. So I sound like I'm promoting the brand, but truthfully, the sponsorship deal is what's important here. And so what this did was it created an actual for-sale product that was driving fan traffic into their stores for something that's iconic to the market, which is Dodger dogs. And it allowed us to not only have all the great assets like signage, and we partnered with Justin Turner, who bears a strange resemblance to their Snack Giant mascot. And we did content, and we added horchata to the reserve level that's only available at AM/PM. And we've done a lot of other really cool things, but that exchange of value, where we created the only place where you can get those 70+ items, and by the way, walk in and get a beer out of a cooler, not wait in line, and then sell Dodger Dogs back at the store, it became an economic model that drives ROI almost first and forefront, but really ultimately, and this is where we started with it, was it starts with the fans, right? Like, how could we create a value for the fans? And bringing chocolate bars and Doritos and variety into the stadium was our value to them, and getting Dodger Dogs at the stores was ours.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for that. That's super. I mean, I could see the parallel. Like, it makes a ton of sense. And I'm sure the Dodger Dogs at AM/PM weren't $18.
They're 2 for $3. Sometimes.
I like that. You got a lot of fans out of that.
I can speak a little bit to the,
Sure,
to
yeah,
the
that'd be
fan
great.
experience. So AEG is obviously, we're a sports and entertainment company, and our focus is on the fan and the fan experience. I wanted to talk a little bit about the use of celebrities in tapping into new fan bases and ultimately gaining more exposure for our partners. So last season, we had Will Ferrell come out in character as Ron Burgundy. If any of you guys, I'm sure many of you guys are aware of the Anchorman franchise, really. He came in character, and he went up into the broadcast booth, and he called the second period of the game in a way that only Ron Burgundy can.
That's funny.
And then we had another theme night where it was Star Wars night, and we had Snoop Dogg come, and he was in it. He was right by the ice, DJing songs with our ice crew who were dressed up in Princess Leia costumes. As you can imagine, it garnered a ton of exposure and a ton of attention, and we were in publications that don't normally cover sports. So it was just a really new and exciting way to use celebrities to again tap into other fan bases and get more exposure for our partners.
I have a question. Back to the line. Autumn, when you were doing that partnership, was your client the Dodgers or AM/PM, or you created that relationship?
My client was AM/PM.
Sure, yeah. As far as integrating brands on a production level, every production has certain brands. I get usually, we get a guide from the sales team saying, for this particular production in a 2.5-hour window, you're going to have the Verizon pregame show, and you're going to open up the show with a Verizon logo, and it's going to fly in, and you have to execute Verizon 3 times within this particular show. And that's, it's a little bit different, but that's how we integrate the brands, and you have to execute those. And what's interesting is that every angle, they're always trying to find new and innovative ways to sponsor things. For example, the lineups may be sponsored by Audi. You can bring in a chip and just put it on top of the clock, and you can run that at RAM. This is advertised by RAM. So I'm always impressed and always caught off guard by the ways that the sales team does a great job in finding new ways to sponsor different things. Sometimes we'll have Subway sandwiches on top of the anchor's desk just to sponsor Subway, and every single time the most important thing is getting those executions done. By the way, it is you have to execute 30 seconds of a player to watch, and from my angle, it's those are the things that are. Besides the game and besides, entertaining the people at home with a great game and the team will take care of it, it is the sponsors that we need to take care of first.
Right.
Yeah, when you were talking about celebrities, our celebrities are athletes, but they're student athletes, and there are very strict NCAA guidelines around what we can and cannot do with them. Obviously, they can't promote an advertiser or a sponsor like that. So even after they leave school, there's still some strict guidelines around it. So if you think about somebody like Gardner Minshew, who was a big Washington State quarterback, who's now a big star in the NFL, or DeAndre Ayton, who was the number one pick out of Arizona, even if, and we get these kinds of requests quite frequently from advertisers, they want to take some of their old footage from college and use it to promote a product. Well, even so, the NCAA guidelines are, and it's not black and white, but, you know, if there is a Gardner Minshew highlight, there can't be another player in it that's recognizable who might still be in school. So they have kind of a window, kind of a 5-year window where they have to make sure that any other athletes that are within that in that picture is not highlighted in any of those advertisements or sponsorships. Now, if it's just a isolated shot, not a problem at all once they leave school. But once they're in school, there's not a lot we can do about it. So it makes it a little bit difficult when we're working with our partners from the ad sales side, because the advertisers want that kind of visibility, because some of those big stars that are in our league become very, very popular, especially because we have schools in big metropolitan areas like Seattle and Los Angeles that they really covet. So it can be very difficult. We have a very layered way that we have to look at any of our partnerships, any of our branding or sponsorships, because unlike SEC Network or Big Ten Network, we are owned by our universities. So the 12 universities in the Pac-12 actually own us. So when it comes to branding partnerships and activations that are in stadium or on site, or fan engagement initiatives that we want to implement, we have to be considerate of any conflicts with the schools themselves, with the NCAA, with our own conference, and then our network and advertisers. And so once a sponsor approaches us with an idea, if we can run that whole gauntlet of restrictions and get to a point where we actually can do something tangible with them, it's usually pretty effective, but it can be difficult.
Right. No, I imagine it would be. And that's an interesting question. I mean, I've worked with a lot of industries that are highly regulated and scrutinized, one being Free Credit Report that I mentioned prior, like maybe the most regulated business outside of banking. And then I actually worked and rebuilt the LendingTree brand after the mortgage crisis, same thing, heavily scrutinized and regulated by the CFPB and all kinds of other acronyms that we could name. I guess maybe an interesting bit for the group here is, based on what you just were outlining with Pac-12, what, in terms of adding value for partners or potential advertisers, let's call them in this case, right? How do you guys leverage, like what do you say? Obviously you can't get too specific with the athletes and all those things, but in order to add value and talk about the audience that you do bring, you talk more about like generalities around like demographics and psychographics, the type of people that would be are involved in Pac-12. You talk a lot about that, I imagine, right?
Exactly. So we do. We talk about the demographics. We talk about just what the Pac-12 stands for, in contrast to other college conferences. You know, excellence in academics and excellence in athletics. As most people know, the Pac-12 has more national championships than all the other conferences combined. And so, you know, that's something we're very proud of. And, you know, when it comes to the Olympic sports, you know, I think we had 14 national championships last year. And we're up to 573 championships, something like that. It's not exactly, but 571 or something like that. Anyway, but, you know, we have a very loyal fan base. So, you know, we work with, we can't do a lot of off-the-shelf kind of sponsorship promotions. You know, we have to really individualize and really customize what our partners want and what our brands want. And, you know, I'm on the network side, I'm at the conference, and, you know, at the network we have two very big marquee events every year. We have our football championship game, which pits the champion of the North Division against the South Division, and that's coming up December 6th. And then we have the Pac-12 men's and women's basketball tournaments, which run concurrently or consecutively in Las Vegas. So those are excellent venues for brand activation, because you have activation areas, you have fan engagement, you have on-site signage, and plus the on-air branding that you do as well. So our sponsors get a big bang for their buck, you know, by anchoring onto those two events. And from my perspective, because I handle distribution and partnership marketing, My partners are the distributors that distribute us. So those are the Xfinities, the Spectrums, the Fubos, the T-Visions, and the Sling and Dishes, those kind of, those are our partners. So we work with them as well with sweepstakes and activation and all those things. Still in consideration with everybody else that's doing the same thing at those events. So, you know, we just can't be in conflict. So.
Right, right.
Yes?
So what are your thoughts on now players, especially finally?
Hey, that's my question.
and go around any school or conference and go and a brand can approach them and say, you like sneakers, we want to advertise with you.
Sure.
Yes, I want to do this myself. The league or I want to do this. How does that now playing now?
Well, you know,
It's happening yet.
well, yeah, I was going to say, it's because it just happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it was initiated by Gavin Newsom by pushing the legislation here in California. There were a number of states that were about to follow suit. And I think at that time, the NCAA said, look, you know, this is an avalanche that's coming at us, and we better do something about it. And they changed their stance rather dramatically. You know, at the Pac-12, you know, we follow the mandate of the NCAA. I spoke to our commissioner, Larry Scott, and I know he's in touch with all of the other commissioners of the Power 5 conferences as well as the other conferences, and they all sit down and they talk about, you know, what this really means moving forward. I don't think anybody knows exactly where this is going right now. You know, the ramp up to it, the parameters that are going to be around it. You know, how do you make it fair and equitable for all student athletes? For all student athletes? I mean, so do the football players get to cash in and make, you know, hundreds and thousands of dollars, and the women's rowing team makes nothing? Is that how that's going to work?
It should be per individual.
Well, you know, that's in theory, that sounds good, I think. But I wonder if, you know, if the universities are going to want to do that. I don't know. I don't know.
Because
Actual individual.
yeah, but in that case, right, you have a similar situation, I would think. Just making this conversational, obviously, but if you have celebrity, you know, sports stars that are part of a team, their talent is being showcased by the NFL, and I think what.
Talk about college.
Yeah, I know,
yeah.
but what Henry is saying here in this case is, in a sense, these college athletes are leveraging the power of the NCAA, and as, you know, they're football players, so there's a lot of exposure on football, but, so, you know, I mean, they're getting the power of the NCAA, but the women's rowing team
Sure.
might not be, and so how do you justify that? How does that work?
And I understand it's an individual thing, but I just, you know, I think one of the goals of any university is to level the playing field and give everybody the opportunity that's afforded to them as they come into the university. And I think that's something that they have to think about.
Right.
It doesn't make as much money as college football. So.
Sure,
You're
totally.
right about that.
Totally.
Yeah, you can't dismiss it.
Now you're going to start seeing people coming in from high school where you have kids that are already building their own brands.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah.
can't think
So it's going to be hard to shut the spigots off.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't do that.
Right. Like I said, nothing's been set. I mean, they're wrestling with this at a whole nother level beyond me, and we'll see what they come up with. I'm sure it's not going to be as smooth as everybody would like it to be, but, you know, they'll get there.
So you had a question?
This is a college, but just how do you deal with the equity issues between male and female under the federal
Title IX.
for male and female sports, Prop 9?
Yeah, Title IX.
I would think that would be a big complicating factor. Certainly it's complicated which teams we even have in many schools, right? Because you can only have so many male teams, et cetera, et cetera.
You're exactly right.
Right.
And it's not really addressed in Prop 9 at all. It
Exactly.
says even split.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Go ahead.
What's germane to this panel is how this decision impacts brand relationships.
That's
Just to
the
bring
next
back-
question.
Well, because brands pay for exposure.
Exactly.
AMPM pays for exposure with the Dodgers, and that's a pro team, so
Right.
it's different.
Right.
But if let's say AMPM was paying for a sponsorship with UCLA,
Mm-hmm.
and the individual athletes are going and getting their own exposure with their own deals,
Right.
that
Right.
would likely lessen the value of the sponsorship to UCLA. AMPM would pay less.
Well, they'll probably do something similar to the pros, right? Where I don't think an athlete would be allowed to get an individual sponsorship for themselves if it was in conflict with the school.
Probably
not. I mean, that's how it is for the pros. It's not like a Dodger player can go out. We're the official convenience store, so players within the Dodgers have to be careful about how they associate with other brands. They can do it without their uniform on. There are nuances there, but usually there are some protections put in place. But you're right, it will become crazy. I mean, if we think that influencers have made celebrity endorsement and PR events and whatnot a crazy battlefield, let's add thousands of students.
Right.
Right, and I think that was another part of the thing to talk about, or a topic to talk about, is, the influencer dynamic and how significant that could be. It was mentioned, you have young kids that have created brands for themselves that are high schoolers or younger, obviously. And as that comes and parlays into college and then ultimately into pro or whatever it might be, there's a lot of complexity there, and I don't know that anyone really has the answers.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right. I mean, you've got these high schools who have built this huge social media following, and they're
Right.
influencers. They're making money off of it.
Right.
And if they're not an athlete, it doesn't make a difference.
Exactly.
They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So the NCAA has a lot to wrestle with to make sure that it works for everyone. There's some universities where college athletes can't get a part-time job. So
That's horrible.
yeah.
That's horrible. The schools making millions of dollars.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's such a divisive, people are very divided on this
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting to watch.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, just a quickie. Was Will Ferrell paid he wasn't. So what motivated him to want to do this?
He's a longtime Kings fan.
Okay. Was it his idea to do the Ron Burgundy, or did you approach him?
Our PR group approached him, and originally I think we approached him to just come and be a part of our hockey night in LA, but he came up with the idea, hey, why don't I come as Ron Burgundy? And we were like, great.
So how does that, I think it's an interesting segue, right, from when you start talking about value creation for, obviously in this case for the Kings and for the fan base, but he doesn't own Ron Burgundy, and ultimately the studio that created the film does, or who, how did that conversation, how was that dealt with in a partnership dynamic? Did he have permission to become as Ron Burgundy and own the likeness that is that character?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know,
Right.
because our PR group handled
Okay.
the setup and the organization of it.
It's interesting in that
Yeah.
kind of scenario, because obviously Snoop Dogg is Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg,
He
yeah.
can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Becoming Will Ferrell, coming as a character that isn't his likeness, you know what I mean? It becomes very interesting. So, any other examples, in a similar light or a similar vein?
Using influencers or celebrities?
Or celebrities where they're using the likeness of maybe a character that they play, to some of the complexities around that and what that might or might do for a partnership.
I mean, like I mentioned, we have worked with Justin Turner because of what he looks like, and we've created content. We created a content series last year that was all about hidden spots in Dodger Stadium with Toongus. We have definitely worked with Dodger personalities in the past. For some of my other clients, I work with Unilever, and they're an NCAA partner for personal care. We definitely utilize, just legends and coaches and notable people. One thing that's been really important for us, and I can't see the name of the brand, but a travel brand that I work with who sponsored the SEC series for quite a long time. at both the network and the tournament, is that we utilize the people who were commentators on the SEC network for our advertising. So if you think about it, part of our deal was ESPN and SEC network TV spots. And the insight there is that using contextual content and advertising drives 20 to 30% more interest from a fan who might be muting what they're watching on TV or pausing and fast forwarding. But if they see a familiar face or potentially hear a familiar voice, they might stop and come back and actually watch that content. And for that, it was funny. It was like these SEC network commentators like doing crazy zany things together, and so it was some of their favorite personalities, being put in really interesting situations around travel. And so for us, I think we do it less on site than like a traditional property that has a ballpark. We do it sometimes, but a lot of it is really creating contextual advertising so that when you are communicating to the fans, and for college sports, a lot of times our target is alumni, frankly, because they travel, they're more affluent, they care, they're rabid fans, they travel for their team. And to create contextual content and advertising means that, if I'm getting 20 television spots during the life of a partnership, I'm using those spots to communicate that the brand is part of the fan nation, that they're celebrating with the fans. And in some cases, if you have a really crazy client and want to do adaptive advertising, that they're celebrating wins and commiserating losses in real time in digital advertising, which gets really exciting.
No, thank you for that. That's a very interesting point that you lead me into around another kind of bit of interest, I think, is as you see more and more streaming platforms and like the fragmentation of audiences and trying to actually capture people's attention regardless of where they might be. You mentioned the Dodger example, which I think is really cool, by the way. The AMPN thing it makes so much sense. I love that. And I guess what specifically, I think this is probably most targeted for you with the types of advertisers that you work with. As these platforms, and like I said, the fragmentation is happening with Disney Plus and all these other platforms, how is that coming into play with a partnership dynamic with the types of advertisers you work with, and how are you targeting them outside of traditional means? Before you could buy some radio, buy some TV, you could do even streaming, and it's trickier and trickier now because they're becoming closed off networks that are subscriber based. What are you guys doing to kind of diversify your value offering for your partners in that regard?
Sure. That's a big question.
Sorry.
I think the answer is that there are far smarter people than me that come up with the media mix, but I know that the fundamentals are always going to be, what is your brand's DNA? What does it stand for? Who is your audience? And then finding a partner where there's credible space in the middle. And knowing how to communicate differently through different channels. So for example, you can be a lot more creative and zany and funny in social media, whereas if you're doing an LED board in a stadium, you have to be a little bit more straightforward and have more of just an advertising message, because the medium kind of dictates the boundaries of how you communicate. I think for us, we also think about, what is the generation of the consumer that we're targeting? If they're younger consumers, and I know this isn't news to everybody, but if they're younger, we're going to prioritize an experience, and we're going to prioritize for Gen Z something that has to do with exclusivity and affluence, whereas if you're Gen X or a boomer, we're going to be looking at how to be utilitarian or create a product or make something easier or better or more fun. Those types of targeting, helps you kind of create a plan so that you know who you're talking to, and then the channel itself, kind of dictates, how you're going to communicate. I mean, there's nothing like contextual content, and I'll probably just beat that drum to death today, but there really isn't, because what do fans want when they're not watching a game? they want to know more about the team, about the players, about what's happening behind the scenes, about how this all comes to be, this big spectacle of sports. And they want to talk about scores and what's going to happen next and what happened 10 years ago, and it's generational.
Right.
Right? So, a brand would be foolish to not want to tap into that and add a value to it. And brands have so much money, and they want people to consider and like their product or their service. And so if they're going to be credibly in sports, they have to commit to the team, and they also have to really show that there is a commitment to that fan base and that they get it. They understand how people want to celebrate and be a part of really a tribe.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that hunger from fans. They really want to see the other side of players, and we do an in-game feature for Coca-Cola where we ask players this or that, and it's the simplest thing. Hey, Drew Doughty, what do you prefer, UCLA or USC, Dodgers or Angels? And the fans love it and they eat it up. And so we put that out on social media this year, and it got even more exposure. We do an original content series for Pepperdine called Inside the Play, where Jim Fox, our play-by-play announcer, sits down with players involved in, say, a game-winning goal or a tying goal, and they sit down with them, and it's just a 3-minute piece, but they're asking them, hey, Anjay, why did you pass that puck instead of shooting it? And fans eat that stuff up.
Right.
So, to your point, fans are super hungry for that type of content, and it can be really, really valuable for brands.
And I'll just say that, from our broadcasting perspective, what has been interesting is we just had the World Series, and it overlapped with Thursday night football. And so what was nice is that we could just send the viewers to the Fox Sports app. So we still had the World Series on the main channel, and if they wanted to see Thursday night football, they can just go on the Fox Sports app and enjoy it that way. The way, from what I've seen, we're treating it exactly the same. The advertisers are going to run the same. We're going to run the billboards. They're going to enjoy it the same on the mobile device. For now, I mean, it might change, and it might, as things progress on the app, it might be treated differently. But we just take the feed, and transmission sends it onto the app. And for TVG, it's the same way for Amazon and Roku. So they take the same exact feed that they're broadcasting to the channel, but they just now stream it over to, from what I've seen. And I think will evolve as we're hearing here, and that's just my perspective on things there.
I think I think from the content side, I mean, one thing that's become apparent in the last couple of years, and I think we all are seeing this, is that there's more and more data available about our consumers.
Right.
So we know where they're watching, we know when they're watching, we know what they're watching. And with dynamic ad insertion and tools like that, we're able to really focus and drive up CPMs by targeting very specific consumers of our content. At Pac-12, we're a linear channel. We have that offer for our sponsors. We are producing much more short form programming that's sponsorable. Like we have a Union 76 moment of the game. That's for social media. Then I know on Twitter we have other moments that we ask our Twitter followers or anybody on Twitter to vote on. What was the play of the game? Those kinds of things. So you try to engage the fan and have them interact on a platform where we know they're going to be. But those are for a certain demographic of fans. And as we're able to get more and more really specific information, it really helps. It helps with that relationship to deliver more of what the sponsors want.
How about you mentioned linear? How about the world outside of linear for you guys? As these platforms, people are moving more to like apps in their TVs and different streaming platforms and.
Yeah, well, we're on 3 OTT platforms.
Okay.
So we're on Sling, we're on Fubo, and we're on 4. I'm sorry, we're on TVision and we're on VidGo. So a lot of times I see all the social media stuff coming through and people complain, I can't see the Pac-12. It doesn't matter where you are in America, you can get Pac-12.
Right.
You just have to subscribe to the right platform. But we look at that and we tailor specific sponsorships and promotions to some of those OTT platforms because they seem to be much more creative, and their focus is something different. They're looking for a subscriber lift as opposed to retention, because we know the MVPD, the MVPDs, the linear distributors, they're losing subscribers every day, every year.
Right.
They're going somewhere. We don't know exactly where they're going. But they're going somewhere. And then there are other platforms that are coming up now that they're up and running, and we're looking at those as well. Things like Samsung Plus, Philo, Zumo, Pluto. Those are all out there too. So we're not there yet, but we're looking at them, and we're taking that very seriously as well, because we want to get as many eyeballs as we can to help our sponsors and our advertisers to reach our audience wherever they may be.
Right, and I think that's interesting you bring that up. I mean, just as a user myself, I just recently got cable again, but I had clipped the cable years ago, but got conned into it again or whatever. But I have all these streaming platforms.
It's basically the same price now, right? If you want everything.
It's cheaper, and now it's like $150 a month, and I'm like, wait a minute. So and now I have all these streaming platforms.
Yeah.
I got all the usuals, the usual suspects. But it's funny because when I was without the cable, I just had the cable internet. There's things like Pluto, and just as a user, you're like, wait, so now I'm signing up for live TV or whatever that is, kind of esque, and then, so it's a very fragmented space. I think consumers are just as confused as to where they go to find whatever they want, and there's no TV guide anymore. So
I have seen, I know Hulu, for example, does those dynamic ads. I don't know how many of you have seen those, where they kind of stop you and say, what kind of ad experience do you want? Do you want an informational advertisement? And I have no idea how those have performed versus a linear spot, but most brands are creating a TV spot and running it on TV and video wherever it may run.
Generically or across the board without specifics or targeting and based on what the platform is. So I guess a really interesting thing for me would be based on some of the uniqueness of the experience up here and the different perspectives you have, obviously agency side, broadcasting, and then also in venue. What you would see as maybe the single largest opportunity, or even maybe threat, or things to your business and what you guys are working on right now around that. That was a tricky one.
Yeah, I'll start. As I said, the traditional linear model, the bundled model that you see at the Comcast and the Charters and Coxes of the world, we see the erosion of those subscribers as being pretty dramatic over the past 2 to 3, 4 years. What we're trying to do is to stay in front of some of these changes and be aware of all the new platforms that are, there's a new one. I get an email every day almost about a new platform, either OTT, direct-to-consumer, or something that's starting up. In a lot of cases, there's not much I can do, but in some cases there is. And so we look at that as an opportunity. We also look at international. I handle all of the international distribution as well for Pac-12. I just got back from Sportel, a huge sports rights event in Europe. And, basketball is the main international driver. American football doesn't mean much, but there is an appetite out there for what we do and the athletes that we have. And it's about education and showing them that, the quality of collegiate sports in America is on par with any other sports around the world, with the exception of probably soccer, which they call football. But we have the best basketball players. We have the best Olympic athletes. Those are all at our universities. And so we see international as a big opportunity. We see these new platforms as a big opportunity. So, it's about keeping our eyes open and being very, not aggressive, but being open to, what's coming, because it's changing.
Right. And we've seen that recently, obviously, in the news with the NBA and what happened with China, and it's very interesting to see how much growth they had there and what's gone on and how they've kind of managed that or not managed, depending on how you look at it, I guess.
Right. And all of those things influence what we do at Pac-12 as well. We just had a game in China between two Pac-12 teams, Arizona State and Colorado. They played last Saturday, Friday night, Saturday in Shanghai. And, they are ambassadors for our conference. And,
Right.
You have to make sure that you are in lockstep with what we're trying to do, the image that we're trying to portray, and the quality of competition that we're bringing there. So it's all connected.
Well, one thing that excites me personally, and I think probably the sponsors and brands as well, is the use of new technology like augmented reality and virtual reality, and how that can be incorporated, how they can sponsor, augmented reality lineups, which they appear in studio, they pop up from the ground. That might be sponsored in the very near future. And also the other thing that really is exciting for TVG specifically is sports gambling and the legalization of more betting for sports. So they're preparing, and besides horse racing, we're going to see a little bit of an increase in coverage for betting on soccer, NFL, and things like that. So we are excited for the future of sports and transactional television, as TVG likes to call it.
Yeah, and piggybacking on to what you're saying, so I don't see this as a threat. It's more of a challenge. It's just the changing landscape of technology. It's constantly changing and evolving. 8 years ago, social media was sort of something we threw into deals, and now it's all anybody wants if they're trying to reach that segment. But I think we're just trying to adapt and embrace these changes. You talked a little bit about AR. So we used to print out programs and just distribute them at games to fans. Well, nobody wants a program these days. Everyone consumes. Great. Okay, great. But most people don't want to take a program. They want to consume things on their phone. So we've actually partnered with an app. And we are, this season, we're making player cards. So on the front side, it's player artwork, and then on the back side, it's partner artwork. And both sides, if a fan downloads the Blip It app and then holds it in front of either the front or the back of the card, that card comes to life using augmented reality. So, that's one of the ways that we're sort of trying to adapt. And we also, interestingly, we just recently signed an agreement with Fuelster. So Fuelster is an app that will come to Staples Center, and say you get to the Kings game and you realize, oh, darn it, my tank's empty, and when I leave at 10:30, the last thing I want to do is go to a gas station. You can go onto your Fuelster app, tell them the location of your car, what parking garage you're in, and they will go and fill your tank while you're at the game.
Oh, wow.
So, it's, yeah, right? Like, why didn't I think of this? But yeah, I mean, we're just trying to embrace these changes in technology and ultimately provide a better experience for our fans attending all of our events.
Awesome.
Wow, I could jump onto all those topics. I think about all of those things. I think about gambling and what that means for my team, because it will totally change the way we talk to an audience that is watching a sports team, because we can't now count on the fact that they're all ardent fans. They might be ardent gamblers.
Right.
So that changes how we think about an audience, whether it's for a team or a league, that people may not actually care about the sport as much as the dopamine. And I think about, the NCAA changes as well. I personally have my own feelings about college athletes, and I definitely think it's unfair that some people make money and others don't, but it will change, maybe it's a naive thing to say, but like what I've always felt was the purity of the game, which I realize is on the backs of players who aren't getting paid, so I understand that. But the purity of college sports, and so maybe that will thrust us into high school sports, and who knows if in 10 years we'll be paying high school students.
If the brands have anything to say, they will.
Right. The Little Leaguer who has sponsors. Yeah. One of the things, and I know this is a topic that all of us have already kind of chatted about earlier, but one of the big opportunities I think that's coming is definitely esports. It's here. But for brands, it's still, something that has a measure of mystery. I think, it's funny, we have 2 esports experts on our team. They go around the country giving esports 101 talks to all of our clients because unless your client is 24 years old, they sit in these meetings and they cannot wrap their heads around what the hell you're talking about. Although when you really look at it and look at esports, it's really not that different from a traditional sports model. It's just that we're all prejudiced against video games, and it's not in a physical athletic sport, but it does take dexterity and strategy and all that. But it's exploding right now, and I think everyone is wondering, nobody can deny the size of the esports industry and the power that it's generating, but it's also a lot of different games, a lot of different segments and audiences, a lot of verticals. There's really not one way to crack open esports, even if the second slide on every deck tells you that it's worth good billions of dollars. And so just trying to figure out from a league and a team and an athlete perspective how to unlock that, because we can't ignore the fact that for Gen Z and millennials, younger millennials particularly, that video games are their national pastime. Sorry, baseball. They're all growing up with them, whether it's on mobile or on desktop or on tablet or what have you. And so it is a sport. You can argue that or not, but I think that that's going to be the next big frontier. And certainly we're seeing pro teams stepping up and starting to try and build their own leagues and jump on the bandwagon, because we have a generation of boys and girls who are really passionate about gaming as a sport.
Right. And you know what also comes from that? Oh, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to jump in there, I think we actually have 2 universities within our conference that offer scholarships for esports players.
It's a real thing.
200.
You said that?
200?
No, but in our conference,
Oh,
too.
your conference,
Yeah,
yeah.
Pac-12.
UC Irvine.
Well, that's not us, but Utah and Colorado.
UC Irvine
Yeah. What's that?
UC Irvine was the first.
Yeah, they were. That's not our
Yeah.
conference. No.
I think you also, Armando, you brought up an interesting point, which I thought I should just touch on really quickly. You brought up virtual reality, which I think is another significant thing that's coming. You see Facebook with its Oculus product, they're actually marketing it on TV now. That's crazy. And what that's going to do for advertising, marketing, all of that is just crazy to think about, and how that's going to play into the world of esports, where you're gaming in a way that's next level from traditional phone gaming or to computer gaming.
AR,
Yeah, exactly.
probably
I
more
was
than
just gonna say
VR
that,
even, and
That's
mixed
the event,
reality.
yeah.
Right. It's pretty wild. So, okay. I think based on that, I'd love to have some questions for the panel. If you, sir, go ahead.
So for Pac-12 and for Kings, how do you identify, how do you reach fans of yours that are not in your geographic region? In other words, if they come to you, if someone lives in Texas and they come out to Los Angeles and they go to a UCLA game and they purchase a ticket, you may know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that's if they find you.
Right.
But your fan bases and schools are global. You have professional teams, the Kings, the Lakers, that are global teams. How do you, since most teams market in a pretty tight geographical region, I think the exclusivity in baseball is 75 miles, I don't know what it is.
In hockey, too.
Hockey, 75, and it's somewhere between 50 and 100 depending on the sport. How do you identify and then how do you maintain relationships with fans outside of your geographic region?
I mean, from my perspective, because I handle distribution, our distributors identify those fans for us, and our alumni network is nationwide. I'll give you an example. So when we have any kind of promotional activity with somebody like a Fubo or Sling, and we see the the analytics come back, we know where everybody is. So we have fans all over. Do we have tons of fans in like Arkansas? Of course not. But I can go in every day and look at some of the analytics about our viewership. And, you know, we look at Nielsen numbers, we look at all the other engagement numbers on our social media platforms, and we see fans coming from all 50 states, probably 100 countries, and we don't target those, you know, specifically, but our distributors who have large distribution in those areas, they do target them, and you know that's how. But we see where they come from.
Do you, okay, so you guys follow up. Do you have a relationship with them individually, or you just see them on an aggregate? There are 100 fans that live in Arkansas who are USC fans, and there's 50 fans in Minnesota who are,
right,
you know, Washington
right.
fans. You just kind of see them in an aggregate and have an actual dynamic with them.
No, not unless they wish to engage or wish to, you know, become, you know, they can tweet back at us and those kinds of things.
Like
but
social probably
yeah,
is.
yeah, but otherwise, no, not a one-on-one relationship with them.
Yeah, same for the Kings. I mean, you know, anybody can follow us on social media. Anybody can go to our website. You know, we talked about content and drawing people in and engaging fans. And you know, you can't reach out to them specifically, but you can make the content attractive to them to make them want to come back and engage with you and your brand.
I mean, one of the drivers for Pac-12 is the fact that our student athletes come from something like 80 different countries, and they come from all over the world, all over the country. So, you know, back home, their families and their friends, those kind of people engage with us and follow, you know, the stars from home that, you know, end up doing well within our conference. So we get decent engagement for that compared to a lot of other conferences.
Awesome. Any other questions? Thoughts? Sure.
For AMPM, when you talked about opening a store in Dodger Stadium, you said you sold beer. How did you get around the beer, the companies that pay a lot to be beer distributors in the stadium? If I was them, I wouldn't be very happy that there was, I can understand if there was a candy bar that was not available elsewhere, so that's unique, that's distinct. But how would you deal with the overlap product, because they're spending a lot of money to be in there?
So the answer is that within a ballpark, you have the official beer sponsors, but almost every major beer chain now not only has their major brands that we all know and love well, but they also have all these different craft, you know, spin-offs and you know, and different types of beer. So the answer is that for soft drinks and for beer, we stock our fridges with every single brand that the sponsor supplies, and there are like 25 different beers that are already in the stadium, and we're putting them in there. Now, where there isn't a sponsor in place, for example, then we can be more creative. So, for example, they had an exclusive flavor of a non-alcoholic drink that they wanted, that was really about their brand, that they wanted to put in the stadium. And because there was no sponsor conflict, we were able to get distribution into the stadium for that product. They had a deal this year with a beer company to have 2 exclusive flavors in the real world outside of the stadium at AMPM, and luckily they were tied to the sponsor that existed, so those 2 exclusive flavors were also at our AMPM store. So we have to swim with the current. We're not allowed to, for example, we can't advertise a special at AMPM if it has a conflict sponsor in it, and really we can't. We can do proprietary food and drinks and beverages and whatnot that are sponsors, but it's not like we can put a chip offer on our Dodger signage, because that's really just providing a pass-through right to a company that's not a sponsor. So there are definitely rules that we have to follow.
Sure.
Henry, does Oregon have gambling, sports gambling?
I do not know that. I don't know. I don't think so.
That was one of the states that started doing.
Yeah, I don't know.
How about any of your Pac-12 states? Did any of them allow sports?
Let me think. None that I can think of.
In Vegas.
No, we don't have anybody in Vegas. No. We do our tournaments. We do our tournaments in Vegas, but
Right.
no schools in Vegas.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all the perspective and insight for the panel. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
You too. Great to meet you too. Yes.
Yeah, we did a good job.
Yeah.
My phone went dead. I had a
Yes.
video.